When I was in middle school, I read a book my mom picked up at a garage sale. And I don't know if you remember those Reader's Digest condensed books, but there was a condensed book about a single woman who adopted from China. And I remember really loving the story and really thinking it was super cool. And over the years, I read it 2 or 3 more times, and I still have that book. But I never thought that I would ever adopt. I don't have really great, warm, fuzzy memories of my family life. And I didn't really have a desire to get married. I didn't have a desire to have kids. I was never going to stay at home with my kids. So looking back, I think everybody can relate to that. You're so glad that God didn't put you in charge of your life, because I think now what a lonely life that would be. But my husband and my daughter went on a mission trip to Siberia in 2003, I think. And my husband came home really, really deeply impacted by all the kids. They actually worked on building a playground at 3 different orphanages. And I think it really took him by surprise by how impacted he was. And we started kind of talking about what that would look like to try to be a family to a child. So really, really long story short, with lots of turns in the road. But fast forward now, I have 2 Russian-American daughters who have been in our family for 9 years.
So I think it was something that we had talked about really, even before we got married, as something that we just had a passion for, and it was something that we really wanted to do. We knew that we wanted to be parents, and it was something that we just, that we were going to be open to. And when we got married, that was just something that was on our hearts all the time.
Yeah, and we went through infertility for about 5 years or so, and had a lot of questions for God during that time. And, it just kept coming back to our mind over and over again. We knew that we were meant to be parents at some point. And, now after the fact, we can see with the way that God worked, if those prayers and those things and had worked differently, then we wouldn't have the family that we have now. And so that's been a real piece to me, I think.
So we considered adoption. We talked about it when we were first dating and married as an option. And then when as often we make plans and God has other plans, as our starting our family didn't happen naturally, we were actually, it was a pretty natural transition for us to say we've always been open to this, and needed to educate ourselves a little bit more. But we'd had friends who had adopted, and we were very comfortable with it, and so we started on the journey, and it was great.
Nothing's ever been more clear to us that God was telling us to adopt. One of us said it out loud. One of us said, we're going to adopt. And it was just both of us, just an incredible peace. It's just indescribable how certain and peaceful we were about it. And we never looked back.
So I guess I'll start. I always, since I was a little girl, had thought that I wanted to adopt. And I didn't really think much about foster care. I just knew that I wanted to adopt. And just from a very early age. And kind of had shared that with York when we got married and before we had kids. And we had talked about it. And even in between Kyron and Addison, had kind of talked to an agency about adopting. But then when we had Addison, we had problems with both of our children. They were born prematurely. And so we knew that we couldn't have any more biological children. And so then it just really kind of came to the forefront, like, now's the time I really want to expand our family in that way.
Yeah.
So.
I, on the other hand, was not looking to adopt at all. And so when we found out that we couldn't have any more kids, I was pretty excited, to tell you the truth. And Jody started talking about adoption, and I thought it would go away like a bad cold. And when it intensified, I knew that we were in trouble. And so we began to look into adoption. But I was really along for the ride. I didn't know where the journey would take us. I wasn't really excited about it until much later in the process. Well, I'll start there because I had all the concerns. I mean, you can list them: financial concerns, emotional energy, time, how it would disrupt our family, how it would impact our kids, how it would change my travel and my ministry. And so most of those concerns had the common denominator, which is me. How is it going to change me? How is it going to change my world? And so I would say in the beginning of the process, my concerns were very self-interested. Another word for that would be selfish. And so I feel like God was using the process to reveal some things that were sinful about my assumptions about my life and what I was going to do with my life. And he also revealed to me a little bit more of his heart about why widows and orphans are really one of the focal points of the scriptures, and why it's important to care for those in our midst who have needs. So I feel like I had all of the concerns. I don't know.
I think that I had wanted it for so long, and I had so many friends that had walked through the journey, and I had walked through it with them. And I just knew that when God calls, he equips. And so I think I had a little bit more kind of a, blind faith, like, oh, it's all going to work out and it's going to be great. And of course, as it became more real, then some of the concerns like, oh, this may really happen. And like York said, how is it going to affect Kyron and Addison? And, they were such tight buddies. And then with the age gap, how is that going to affect them? And how is it going to affect the new baby? And, and with York, if he's not 100% on board, then, there was kind of some tension there. So I think those concerns kind of came up when it started to become a reality.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think you naturally think about, like, how does it work, like legally, procedurally, all that, and then there's really, unfortunately, a lot of false premises out there, stereotypes about adoption that are just wrong. That was a concern, and I think probably the biggest thing that you do have to look at is family, and how family is going to look at this. There's a need, a big need that the church should be aware of for transracial families. And, unfortunately, there are still, in some generations, there's some barriers there. I think there's no other way to put it. And so, we wanted to go to our families and have them understand what our heart was, what God had put on our hearts for, that we would be open to transracial, and everyone was super supportive, and that helped out a lot.
Another concern that I had, I don't want to say I'm controlling. I like to be in control, and I like to know what's going to happen. I like to know the steps that are going to happen. And once you go through everything that you control, the paperwork, the setting up home study, getting your physical, getting your fingerprints, things like that, you basically turn it into the adoption agency, and you wait. And so many things it feels completely out of your control, but of course it's under God's control. And so you just wait for a phone call and for when God tells you to leap, and you leap. And so that can be challenging sometimes, because you're in control, and very much in control up until a certain point, and then you're not anymore.
Going into it, it's hard to break it down into little pieces, and you think that there's so much to it, but there really wasn't. It went a lot quicker than we had expected. The process itself, anyway. After that, I think the next biggest concern was really how God would grow our family. And we had to be willing to kind of come out of our comfort zone when it came to ages of kids. God pushed us to be open to even older kids, even though we thought, well, maybe, we'd want to start with a baby, or we'd want to start with a toddler. He pushed that envelope, and we were finally okay. We got to the point where we just said, all right, what do you have for us? And we really had to put a lot of trust and faith in. It was just a really hard time to really say, okay, whatever you have, this is what we'll.
And I think as soon as we opened, like we said, hey, God, what do you really want for us? I think as soon as that happened, like everything just happened quick. It was just something that was like, yep, okay, now that I've molded you to this point, like if you trust me, then here's the world. I'm going to open up the world to you, and this is going to happen right now, and this is how it's going to happen. And we were ready for it by then.
Yeah.
I think he knew that it was his perfect timing, and he knew exactly what was going to be next. And as soon as we could get over that fear, and
we had to get over ourselves.
Yeah.
And really, that was a big deal. And what we thought our family was going to be, and what we, had always envisioned ever since I was a little girl. I was going to be this mom, and we were going to have this many kids, and, the whole bit. And when we finally really honestly gave that over to God, then things started happening that we never thought would happen or could happen.
Yep.
We were at a place in our life where growing our family really wasn't on our radar. I think a lot of people were really surprised that we would consider adding to our family as older parents. But God just kept really nudging both of us. And I'd like to say I don't ever believe that God calls one parent in a marriage to adopt and not the other. So if you're getting the nudge and maybe your spouse is not, you can trust the Lord with that. And if it's supposed to be, he'll nudge the other person. But Brian and I both just really felt the call. It was just heavy. And so we just had to put aside our fears. And I think that's where looking back on God's faithfulness in your life really inspires you to trust him more. Because we couldn't think of a time when he hadn't been faithful or provided or carried us. And so there was really no reason to think that he wouldn't continue to be faithful. We originally started to adopt 2 older boys. And after 2 years, God shut the door on those adoptions. And that was really hard to understand. Those boys are now 17 and 18, and they remain in the system in Russia. So that was really hard to take. And then when the phone rang and we were offered 2 little baby girls, 18 months old, we were very floored and weren't sure what to do. We asked for time to think, and things were moving really quickly. We had to decide really quickly, and we sat down, and we couldn't really think of a reason to say no except for our ages. And we didn't see anything in God's word that would support us saying no, because we thought we were too old. So we said yes. And, if God's nudging you to say yes, always say yes. Never say no.
I didn't know how to be a parent ahead of time. I had all these preconceived notions of, this is how I'm going to parent because this is the way that my parents did, and raised me. Like some of these things just didn't come naturally to us, and maybe that's okay, and maybe that's normal as a parent, is having to go through those challenges. But I feel like my kids are really teaching me a new way to be who I am.
Mm-hmm. And I think, just our relationship with God as a couple and as a family completely changed. And it was more that we had to deal with some things that we weren't responsible for. We like to call it the invisible suitcase. So they come with all of these things that they think about the world, the things that they think about adults, and things that they think about themselves. And our goal for being their parents was to change all of those negative feelings in that suitcase and repack it with the love that we have, and that we could be the people that they needed us to be. We can be the parents that they needed for us to be. And I mean, sometimes it was really, really difficult and it still is. And I think it's always going to be. That's part of being a parent, whether the kids are biological or they're from, foster care or they were adopted. It's just, it's a time that you get to learn a lot more about yourself. You get to really focus on, where my relationship with God was, where our relationship with God was as a couple, and really God's truth and being able to share that with them and something that they've never heard or experienced before.
So something that has really surprised me is that for me, like, I really do forget that she's adopted. And I've heard other people say that, and you think, like, how can that be? But I really do forget, and I remember there was one day where I was disciplining her or something, and then she said something kind of witty, and it just kind of hit me like she's just so great, and she's such this little like spitfire, and she's so funny, and then it like hit me like she has a birth mother that doesn't know her, and it just really surprised me. Like, I just remembered, like, oh, there's someone else that should know her and should be a part of this, and they don't. And so just sometimes the surprise of, like, forgetting and then remembering and then forgetting, and then when it just kind of hits you, that surprised me.
Yeah. For me, I think the surprise was how quickly I fell in love with my daughter. And immediately from the first day I met her, I knew she was mine. And I think from there, it was kind of one surprise after another. I think initially my fears about my own limited financial resources, my own emotional capacity, they were really put to bed pretty quickly. We always had multiple dining sets that had a fifth chair, and there's four of us. There's mom and dad and our two biological kids. And there was always this fifth chair. And it kind of became a talking point as we were praying about adoption and talking through adoption. And we're just kind of, as we're dreaming about what it was going to look like to fill that fifth seat, I was focused on how much more resources it was going to require, what kind of sacrifice it was going to require. And the surprise for me was when God brought Gabby into our lives, she came pre-blessed from her Heavenly Father. And I feel like we've inherited the blessing and the special place in God's heart that He has for her. And all of my fears, every single one of them, were just totally thrown out the window because she came with the pre-blessing. I feel like I get to take care of God's daughter, God's special daughter.
For me, it would be the relationship we've developed with Caleb's birth parents. And it's like we've extended our family, right? And we have two people who we see, separately a number of times per year, and we share a bond with them that is, you just can't describe to someone else. They don't understand it, it's like having more family. So it's really neat. It's been neat to see our relationship grow, but also the four of us share. He has parts of each of us, which is funny. He's like a combination of four people, and so you can pick out various points of like where he might get something from, and it's really neat to see as he develops, but also to share with them and to share the awesome brave decision that they made to know that certainly we are not perfect parents. We mess up quite a bit, but that we're doing our best, and that he's really enjoying life, and he's a great kid. He's pretty hilarious, and they enjoy seeing him. So that's just been an awesome thing, and I don't think I perceived how far that relationship could have gone, right? We always thought, it'd be, we understood that openness would be good, and very healthy for the child, but I don't think we ever realized that it would grow into this bond that's really strong and really important part of our lives.
Kids are kids, and parenting is hard. And every phase of parenting, there are so many joys and there's so many challenges, but it's just so good. And it just gets down to, if God is doing this, he is going to show himself, and he is going to be so faithful. And I still can't get over the mystery and the awesomeness of how it's like God put his finger on the map in, Plymouth, Michigan, of our little family, and then his other finger on the other side of the ocean to two little baby girls, and perfectly matched us. I couldn't possibly love my girls any more than I do, and I love them more each day, and I love God more each day, because he's just so cool that he did that. And I daily stand amazed that I get to be their mom, and it's such a privilege. It's a huge privilege.
Be open. Some people, or even ourselves, we had thought about, like, well, what is the exact criteria where we're going to say, this is going to work, or this isn't going to work, or, open adoption or closed adoption, or, all these different things that you have to decide. If you decide what your box is going to be, or, how narrow everything is going to be, you could be cutting off an opportunity that God really has for you.
And we found ourselves there, because at first, like we said before, at first we thought, it would be best for us to have a 2 to 3 year old, because that really would fit, within our family dynamic and, all these other things. And every day I felt like something different happened. Another door opened, another opportunity came about, and those opportunities, they never ended up.
They just didn't pan out.
Yeah, they didn't pan out. But that's what pushed us and opened our hearts even more and more. Because at one point we were like, okay, a lot of these kids, you're talking 85% of kids that are in foster care right now within the United States and with Michigan, they're all 10 and older. And, that wasn't our view of adoption at that point. But there were a lot of things that came up that really pushed us to, what? We could do that. We could be parents. We could be first-time parents to a teenager. It sounds really, really scary, but you know what? If as long as we've got God on our side, we can do it. And so it really positioned us to be open to really anything that he had. And we talked about and went through a lot of sad stories and kids that just needed homes and things that we were willing to do and to jump in for, and he just closed those doors for a reason. I
think that's kind of where I would say, for anybody else, like, don't fit God in a box.
Yeah.
It's not, if you put in, those limitations and things. At one point I think we were talking about, what about this family of like 5 kids? Like, do you think we can make this happen? And we're just like, I don't know. We should at least inquire. Like, I don't know if it's going to happen, but like, as soon as it's liberating in one sense, but on the other hand, it's like it's really scary. But as soon as you say, you know what, God, this isn't for us, you're on the wrong end of the communication at that point. It's something where you just have to put it out there and say, we're open. Like, we don't know if this is going to work out, or we don't know this is going to happen. But if we put our trust in God, he's going to open the doors exactly the way. And
stepping out by faith.
Yeah.
And just letting be what he had for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such a hard process, but it's such a wonderful process at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so I guess, it's, everybody always says it's like a roller coaster, or it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You hear all these sayings and they're all true, and you do labor, not physically, but emotionally. And, you know, all those kind of cliches that you hear are so true. And it's just, I think I would just say that in the end, it's really worth it.
So if you think about the metaphor that God uses when he talks about being saved, becoming a Christ follower, he uses the metaphor of adoption. We are adopted into the forever family of God. So this idea of inclusion, of coming into a family, it is a part of who God is. And I would say that for Christians, particularly Christians in America who have the resources that we have, you might not have that fifth chair, but you have a chair. There's an opportunity to become more like your Heavenly Father by providing that space, whether it's temporary or permanent. You know, when we think about the fact that there are nearly 400,000 children in foster care in the United States, you don't have to get on a plane. You don't have to raise $15,000 or $20,000 to adopt them. In fact, I think when it was all said and done, we got paid $100, to finalize our adoption. The reality is the need is just absolutely incredible. And if the Christian church doesn't provide that space at the table, I don't know who will. So it's an invitation to become more like our Heavenly Father. And it's an invitation really to change the world one child at a time.
It's an amazing thing. I mean, there is a need. There is a need, and while it's not for everyone, it is something that every believer should pray about and really discover with God if that's something that He's placed on their heart and for their lives, because it can be so rewarding, and it really fulfills what we are called to do, and it's just such a blessing. I almost can't even put it into words, but it's just like, you should pray about it, you should understand it, but be open to it. And even if you're someone who's not considering it or who doesn't feel called to it, understand how you can support it too. And that's even in just the way you talk. You know, there's little jokes people make about adoption that are hurtful, and they hurt an overall cause, or they make people feel like it's for some reason a second choice, and it's not. It's, I can tell you, I have a beautiful little boy at home who is by no means a second choice. He's awesome. He's a perfect fit with us, and it's God's plan for us. And so understand that even if you're not called to it, like, know what you can do to help really change the conversation about it, because unfortunately that's sometimes what holds people back, is that there's these more cultural barriers than anything. And I think we're called to reject the world, and if the world is what's holding us back, then we need to really consider how we can take that to God and let Him work us through it.
I would say, if you feel led, if you are interested at all, anything in your heart is telling you to look into adoption or look into foster care, then don't be afraid. There has been no greater blessing in our lives than our adoption experience and being able to be Caleb's parents. No greater blessing.
Don't ever base a decision in fear. God's so big and so good and so faithful, and if He is in it, He's going to do it. The one who called you is faithful, and He will do it. I look back on 30 years of being a mom and 9 years of being an adoptive mom, and it's all Him. It's all Him. He does it all. I can't look back and say, well, I did this right or I did this right. He did it all. He doesn't make mistakes. He does everything for eternal good. And I'm so glad that I didn't let fear cause us to miss out on an amazing adventure. So if God wants you to do it, just do it. Because it's awesome. Have I convinced you to adopt yet?